The superintendent said it with his hands folded on the desk, which is always how that kind of thing gets said. It was October 1957, and the administration building of Glenwood Springs Unified School District sat 2 blocks from the Colorado River on a quiet street where the cottonwoods had gone yellow and were dropping their leaves onto the sidewalk one at a time in the cold morning air. The kind of building where the radiators knocked and the floors were oak, and the smell was chalk dust and old paper, and the particular staleness of rooms where decisions had been made for a long time. Superintendent Gerald Ames had a letter on his desk and a board resolution behind it, and a way of speaking that was careful and not unkind, which was its own kind of cruelty. He said the district had reviewed the matter. He said the classroom incident had created a concern. He said the board's position was that Miss Loretta Marsh's contract would not be renewed for the spring term, effective immediately given the circumstances, with 2 weeks' severance and a reference letter on file that he himself would be pleased to write. Loretta Marsh sat across the desk from him and did not move. She was 34 years old. She had been teaching 4th grade at Lincoln Elementary in Glenwood Springs for 9 years. 9 years of the same 22 desks, the same south-facing windows that let the afternoon sun cut across the room at an angle that made the chalk dust glow. The same coat hooks by the door where the children hung their things in the morning and reclaimed them at 3 o'clock. She had taught every child in that room to read. She had stayed 45 minutes after the bell on average 4 days a week for 9 years, not because anyone asked her to, but because some children needed the extra 45 minutes, and she had it to give. She had a master's degree from Colorado State, completed in the evenings over 4 years while she was teaching full-time. She had not told the district she was pursuing it. It did not seem relevant to the work. There were 3 other people in the room. A woman from the district office named Mrs. Carroll, who was there to take notes, a board member named Harlan Pruitt, who sat to the right of the superintendent and had not said anything and did not look as though he intended to. And in a chair near the window, a man who had been asked to wait while his truck was serviced at the garage 2 doors down and had been directed here when he asked where he might sit quietly for an hour. He wore a canvas jacket over a work shirt, dark wool trousers, trail-dusted boots. He had a tan Stetson resting on one knee. He had been reading a newspaper when the meeting began, and he had stopped reading it. Here is the story. The classroom incident, as the superintendent called it, had taken place on a Thursday afternoon 3 weeks earlier, the last day of September. A boy named Thomas Garrett had come to school that morning, in the same clothes he had worn the previous 4 days. He was 9 years old. His father worked a section gang for the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad and had been laid off in August. His mother took in ironing. Thomas had 3 younger sisters. He brought his lunch to school in a paper bag when he brought it at all, and on the days he didn't bring it, he sat at the table and did not say anything and ate nothing, because he had learned that asking for things that couldn't be given made everyone feel worse, not better. On the morning of September 30th, Thomas came to school without shoes. Not without good shoes. Without any shoes. The pair he had were worn through at the soles by October, and his father had not been able to replace them, and the morning had been cold enough that the ground in the schoolyard had frozen in the low spots. Loretta Marsh saw him come in. She saw him sit down. She saw the way he tucked his feet under his chair and did not look up when the other children came in around him. She dismissed the class for lunch. She sent Thomas to the library with a note asking the librarian to let him stay and read for the full period. She drove to Garfield's Dry Goods on Main Street and bought a pair of work boots in Thomas's size 4, she had looked, and a pair of heavy wool socks. She paid $4.80 out of her own pay envelope. She was back before the bell. She put the boots and socks on his desk when the class came back from lunch. She said nothing about them to the class. Thomas looked at them and looked at her, and she was already at the board writing the afternoon's arithmetic problems, and that was that. The other children noticed. Children always notice. One of them mentioned it at home that evening. The complaint came from a parent named Morris Whitfield, whose son sat 2 desks from Thomas. Whitfield brought it to the board. A teacher had used school time to leave campus for a personal errand and had singled out a student in a way that caused embarrassment and disrupted the classroom order. He used the word singled out 3 times. He said his son had asked why Thomas got new boots and he did not, and that this was the kind of question a parent should not have to answer. Gerald Ames had gone to Loretta Marsh before taking it to the board. He said he personally had no objection to what she had done. He said the board had a different view. A parent's formal complaint had to be addressed. Loretta Marsh had said, "I used my lunch period. I was back before the bell." Ames had said, "I know that, Miss Marsh." She had said, "And Thomas needed shoes." Ames had said, "I know that too." There had been a silence. He told her the board would meet the following week. She went back to her classroom and taught the afternoon. She did not mention it again to anyone. The board met. The resolution passed 4-1. Harlan Pruitt had been the one. Now Loretta Marsh sat in the chair across the desk, and her hands were folded in her lap, and her face was composed in the way a face is composed, when the composure is the only thing left to control. If you've ever watched someone take a punishment they did not earn and had no way to stop it, drop a comment below. Drop your state, too. I want to know how far this story reaches. The man near the window had set his newspaper on the floor beside his chair. He was watching Ames. Not Loretta Marsh. The superintendent. The meeting ended with what meetings like that always end with. Procedural language. The reference letter on file. The 2 weeks. Loretta Marsh said thank you in the way that is not gratitude, and stood up and picked up her bag and walked to the door. The man near the window stood up when she stood up. He was large enough that when he stood, the proportions of the room changed around him. He put the Stetson on. He looked at Gerald Ames, not with anger, with something that had less heat than anger and more weight. He said, "Who's on the school board?" Ames looked at him. He said, "I beg your pardon?" The man said, "The names." Of the board members. Ames gave them 4 names. He gave them the way a man gives information when he is not sure what it will be used for, and has decided it is better to answer than to refuse. The man nodded once. He picked up his newspaper. He looked at Loretta Marsh. He said, "You drove to Main Street on your lunch break and bought a 9-year-old boy a pair of boots because it was cold." It was not a question. Loretta Marsh said, "Yes," he said, "and you were back before the bell." She said, "Yes." He looked at her the way a man looks at something he is making sure he has understood correctly, then nodded again, once, the way a man nods when the thing is confirmed and does not require further discussion. He said, "I owe a man a letter anyway. I'll write 2. Then he walked out. Loretta Marsh stood in the doorway of the superintendent's office and watched him go. Gerald Ames sat behind his desk and did not move. Mrs. Carroll had stopped writing. Harlan Pruitt, by the window, looked at the chair where the man had been sitting as if trying to work out what had just happened. Loretta Marsh went home. She sat at her kitchen table for a long time. She did not tell anyone what had been said to her in that office, or by the man near the window, because she was not sure what to make of it, and was not in the habit of building on things she couldn't be sure of. She graded papers. She went to bed. The letter arrived at Gerald Ames's office on October 21st, 1957. Standard envelope. No return address beyond a post office box in Los Angeles. 1 page. It was addressed to the Glenwood Springs Unified School Board of Directors. Attention Gerald Ames, Superintendent, it said, in its entirety, that the writer had been present on October 9th during the meeting at which Miss Loretta Marsh's contract had been terminated, and that he wished to set down his observations for the record. That a teacher who spent $4.80 of her own money on a cold morning to put shoes on a child who had none, and returned to her classroom before the bell, had not violated any policy worth the name. That the board had confused a parent's embarrassment with a student's welfare, and had resolved the confusion in the wrong direction. That Miss Marsh's 9 years of service in that district represented precisely the kind of faithfulness that school boards existed to protect, not to discharge. That he was writing because he believed the board had made a mistake, and that men who believe a mistake has been made are obliged to say so plainly. The letter was signed with a name. Gerald Ames read it once. He read it again. He called an emergency board session for October 28th. The vote to reinstate Loretta Marsh was 3-1, with 1 abstention. Harlan Pruitt was the one. The board sent Loretta Marsh a letter on October 29th. It offered reinstatement with full back pay for the period of her dismissal, 19 days, at her contracted daily rate of $18.40. Totaling $349.60, and a formal letter of apology from the district that Gerald Ames wrote himself. She read the letter at her kitchen table. She read it again. Then she put it down and sat with it for a while. She was back in her classroom on November 4th, 1957. 22 desks. The south-facing windows. The coat hooks by the door. Thomas Garrett was in his seat, in the boots she had bought him, and a new pair besides, which his father had managed in the weeks she had been gone. He did not say anything when she came in. He did not need to. She taught school in Glenwood Springs for 23 more years. Loretta Marsh retired in June 1980. At the party the district held in the gymnasium of Lincoln Elementary, the principal read out a number someone had taken the trouble to calculate. In 32 years, Loretta Marsh had taught approximately 704 children to read. That count did not include the ones she tutored after the bell. It counted only the names in the roll books, 1 year at a time. Thomas Garrett was not at the party. He was in Denver by then, working as a civil engineer for the Colorado State degree, class of 1971, 3 children of his own. He sent a card that arrived 3 days late. It said, "I still have the first pair. My daughter thinks they belong in a museum. Maybe she's right." Loretta Marsh put the card in the cedar box on her bedroom dresser, next to her master's degree certificate and a photograph of her first class from September 1948. She did not frame it. Some things do not need framing to be kept. The letter to Gerald Ames is not in any public archive. What is known is what it caused. The vote. The reinstatement. The $349.60 back pay. The 23 years that followed. The second letter, the one Wayne said he owed a man anyway, went to a studio in Los Angeles. No one has found it. Whatever it was paid quietly. A letter. A woman back at her desk on a Monday morning. The coat hooks by the door and the chalk dust moving in the afternoon light. That is all that's left of it. That is enough. John Wayne never told anyone he wrote that letter. Not to his co-stars, not to his director, not in any interview or profile or conversation that anyone ever recorded. If he mentioned it to a friend, the friend kept it. There is no account of it from his side. Only a superintendent's emergency board session on October 28, 1957. And a vote. And a woman back in her classroom. The kind of man who writes one letter and walks away has decided something that most men never fully decide. That the act itself is the point. Not the credit. Not the outcome. Not even the gratitude, which in this case he would never have received. Because Loretta Marsh never knew who sent it. He saw a woman take a punishment for doing something plainly right. He was in the room when it happened. He wrote down what he had seen and signed his name to it and mailed it and went back to whatever he had been doing. Some things, once done, don't need to be spoken of again. If this story reached you, share it with someone who'd understand why it matters. Subscribe if you haven't. There are more of these, and every one of them deserves to be told. And unfortunately, they don't make men like John Wayne anymore.